Let's dive right into the Q&A. We'll try and get through a bunch of questions, and then I'm going to give Scott an opportunity to share some final thoughts before we conclude. First question, are certain companies more susceptible to the COVID-19 disruption than others?
So as it pertains to medical malpractice insurance, I think the bigger companies that have a longer term outlook and have significant surplus in the bank are going to be better off. And those companies typically can weather storms. This is a storm within a storm. The storm that surrounds this is this increase in claim activity, severity of claims, and premiums going up. And how do these companies weather that? And then within it, there's a short-term cash flow problem for medical malpractice insurance carriers. As we just spent 30 minutes discussing, there's a lot less premium coming in the door than they had anticipated. And expenses, depending upon how they've run their business, are fixed to an extent. So how do they perform financially? And does that mean they have to raise rates in 2021 to kind of come back and supplement what they didn't get in 2020? We'll see, but I would say the small companies that don't have a very strong financial position or are seeking to constantly find new reinsurance annually, which is another discussion, those are the ones I'd look out for.
Thank you. Next question. Do you foresee any risks emerging after the surgeries and patient care resumes to pre-virus levels?
That's a great question. I would say there's going to be risks as we come out of this, right? It's not like we're going to go from completely shut down to back to regular society. There's going to be, it could be years before we get back to normal. But there's little things like just PPE and sterilization within a practice or a surgery center. The masks, the intubation devices that are used in healthcare. How are they cleaned? How are the filters? Is one filter good for every patient, or does it have to be cleaned or thrown away? Do they scrub the particles properly? Those things, unfortunately, could be examined very closely in the coming years as we get out of this. The best thing we can all do is make sure that your coverage is reactivated and you're staying up to date on protocols and procedures, in large part passed down by med mal carriers and the government to ensure that exposure is low to claims and liability.
Thank you. Let's continue moving through a few more questions. Do you think carriers backdate changes to the work hours and type of work performed during the pandemic?
So as I explained, some companies are going to take a sort of a retroactive look at this and say, you stopped practicing in some capacity full-time surgery at all in March, on March 16th, right? Or April 1st, or whatever the date may be. But other companies and are doing this prospectively, and so the dates are going to vary. But we do see, if advocated properly, we do see an avenue for groups to get credits retroactively, and I think the smart companies, the ones who are in it for the long term to support the physicians, will do the right thing. But advocating, whether it's directly or through a broker, is the best way to get the resolution.
Thank you. Let's tackle a few more questions and then we will wrap up. Second last question. My practice is in New York. Would you suggest it's better to purchase cyber coverage through my carrier or through another company?
So in New York, good question. It's a bit complicated, but regulatory nature in New York is complicated. So some companies in New York have it embedded, risk retention groups specifically, and the admitted carriers do not have it embedded. So they would need to go to an outside market for it. And it's not as though they're going to have to pay that much more for it, but they do have to buy it separately in New York.
Okay, final question. What, if anything, can a practice do to avoid having their medical malpractice rates going up?
Yeah, the most important, there's two factors. I think I mentioned a couple of them in the presentation, but most importantly, take advantage of risk management measures, looking at the data, looking at the claims, correcting any policies and procedures that may lead to a series of claims, or maybe it's just a physician that needs to be intervened with. And secondly, you need to have coverage of the marketplace. We do, despite the changes in the market, despite premiums going up, claims going up, and a hardening of the market, we do have a very healthy marketplace nationally. A lot of companies with strong financials, and so they need to be leveraged. The competition breeds a reduction in cost throughout industry, and this business is no different. So whoever you use, whoever your broker is, needs to have a broad coverage of the market.
Thank you, Scott. That's all the time we have for questions. As I mentioned, if you submit a question that was not asked during the Q&A, it will be provided to Scott along with your contact information for follow-up. Scott's contact information is on this slide now. So, Scott, I don't want to speak for you, but I suggest you would not object if folks also chose to reach out to you directly if they had questions. Sure. Before we conclude, I want to give Scott an opportunity to share some final thoughts. Scott?
Yeah, thanks everybody. We're here to help, and for the physicians and practices on the webinar, thank you for all you do. It is heroic, but hope everyone is safe and we get back to normal sometime soon.